This is the presentation that was given by Malmesbury Nostalgia and Bustard Productions to the 2013 Malmesbury Carnival. Features the superb souvenir album that was put together by the late Jim Gilmore, dealing with the Malmesbury Carnival of 1939. We cannot thank Jim's family enough for allowing us to look through his considerable archive of carnival-related materials, and hope that tonight will shed a little bit of light upon one of the most extraordinary carnivals of all time. Meet Gwen Hitchings, the Carnival Queen for Malmesbury in 1939. In a newspaper cutting from the time, we are told that, with dignity befitting the occasion, and in the presence of a large concourse of her subjects, Miss Gwen Hitchings, a Malmesbury girl who is a clerk in the rural district council offices, was last night crowned Queen of Malmesbury Carnival. The crowning ceremony in the town hall was performed by the Countess of Suffolk. Miss Sophie Webb, the retiring Queen, announced the election of the new Queen, and the Mayor, Dr. Bernulph Hodge, extended welcome to the new Queen, to whom the people of Malmesbury offered royal and sincere congratulations. And so, on Thursday the 17th of August 1939, in the Athelstan Theatre, Gwen Hitchings was crowned by the Countess of Suffolk, in the presence of Lord Suffolk, the previous Carnival Queen, Miss Sophie Webb, Dr. Bernulph Hodge, the Mayor of Malmesbury in 1939, John Lockstone and Elizabeth Leng, who acted as her juvenile attendants, together with 4 Malmesbury girls who acted as her adult attendants: Miss Olive Pinner, or Pinnell, Miss Violet Fraser, Miss Florrie Bishop, and Miss Kathleen Brown. In addition, Mr. H. W. Cole acted as the Prime Minister, Mr. H. Chew was the mace-bearer, and Alderman H. Matthews and Alderman G. H. Turner, hidden behind the Countess of Suffolk, represented the town council in all their robes of office. Mr. Sidney Farmer played the part of the Fool, and Mr. Hislop and Mr. Bishop played the part of trumpeters in livery. Of particular interest in this picture, taken shortly after the crowning ceremony, are the expressions on the faces of Lord Suffolk and his wife. A reporter of the time commented, "Inside the gaily decorated hall, the happy ritual of the crowning took place on a brightly lit stage. Miss Hitchings sat on a throne, a crown upon her head, and a blue coat cloak over her shoulders. The colourful ritual began with Miss Sophie Webb, the ex-Queen, placing a golden key on a stool and proclaiming, 'Citizens of Malmesbury and district, my reign is at an end.' The Mayor, in a short address, welcomed everyone to the crowning and congratulated Miss Hitchings and her 4 attendants. In response, Miss Hitchings said, 'I'm deeply grateful for you for having elected me Queen. I will do my best to fulfil my duties faithfully, and I hope that when the reign of Carnival is ended, you will go home with light hearts and empty pockets.' The court then had to reenact the scene for the movie cameras, not Bustard Productions before anyone suggests it, before leaving for the hall. Sadly, despite all of our efforts, we've yet to track down the results of the filming, but if anybody can help us, please let us know. On emerging into the Crosshays car park, the crowd heartily cheered the Queen and her attendants, and they then made a tour of the town. They were received everywhere with tumultuous applause. And so to Friday, the 18th of August, 1939. Organised by Mr. H. W. Cole and Mr. J. Llewellyn Jones, the Flitch trial in the Athelstan cinema was a great success, as reported in the North Wilts Herald of the day. Mr. E. C. Fielder was described as being an admirable judge, looking the part and bringing real life to the trial. In wonderfully flowery prose, the newspaper report goes on to report, unlike counsel and certain members of the jury, Justice Fielder was not swayed by the blandishments of the female applicants, one of whom attempted to incite sympathy by a mishap in the witness box. It might have impressed some, but a broken string touched no responsive chord in the liberation of the Lord Chief Justice. Clerk of the Court was played by Mr. Charles Jones, with Mr. Montague Harris and Mr. F. Hudson representing the claimants. Defending the Flitch were Mr. G. Rowntree and Mr. B. Lamplugh. The jury at the trial consisted of Miss Simmons, Miss Beak, Miss Alexander, Miss Wilkins, Miss Parry and Miss M. Beak, and Dr. Hodge, Mr. Llewellyn-Jones, Mr. Basavy, Mr. Farmer, Mr. Bodman and Mr. Richards. The four applicants at the trial were Mr. and Mrs. Clark of Abbey Mill, Mr. and Mrs. Bailey, Mr. and Mrs. Burt Clark, and Mr. and Mrs. Hitchings of Tetbury. Each pair had to prove to the court that they had lived happily and without quarrel for a year and a day. Mr. and Mrs. Burt Clark declared that they'd never had a quarrel to speak of in 30 years of wedded bliss. The longest record was that of Mr. and Mrs. Bailey, who'd survived 36 years in double harness. It was their second appearance in court, and the strain had its effect on Mrs. Bailey. A former winner of the Flitch, Mrs. Bailey offered to bribe the court with free beer, for which offence she was castigated roundly by the judge. Juryman Hodge, with one eye on the Flitch, tried to make up to Mrs. Hitchings. It appeared likely that there was some sort of arrangement between them, and that Dr. Hodge was to receive a portion of the prize if Mrs. Hitchings got the verdict of the jury. Things did not, however, work out that way. The jury found all four pairs of applicants and directed that the Flitch be equally divided. For those people who don't know what a Flitch is, it's a side of bacon. There are still Flitch trials held today, the most notable being the Dunmow Flitch trials. Dr. Hodge, who was the mayor in 1939, is seen in this photograph with Mr. Tommy Morse, mayor in 1936. They're talking with Mr. Bernard Basavy, just before his death-defying act as the great Athelstanio. Mr. Basavy was manacled and then tied into a sack before being thrown into the river in front of a huge audience. Emulating the feats of the great Harry Houdini, Mr. Basavy was able to rid himself of the chains and escape from the sack and swim to the surface in a feat that was described in the Wilts and Gloucestershire Standard as being of extraordinary bravery. These two photographs show Miss Hitchings processing through the town on Saturday the 19th of August 1939. But how did she become Carnival Queen? Back in the pre-war years, the Carnival Queen was selected based upon the number of tickets that she'd been able to sell for carnival events and the Carnival Ball. In a local newspaper report of the time, we are told that the good fortune for 1939 fell to Miss Gwen Hitchings, and it could hardly have been more popular. She's described as being well known throughout the rural district, as she is within the confines of the borough. The new Queen was on the staff of the Rural District Council and was imbued with laudable public spirit. She's a warm-hearted supporter of the Westport Congregational Church and an ardent advocate of the Liberal cause. Of a generous disposition to any deserving cause, her election as Carnival Queen was hailed with delight and received loyal endorsement. Here we see Gwen together with her page boy John Lockstone making her way through town as part of the carnival procession. The very fact that such a carriage was used, bedecked with floral decorations, shows just how important to the town of Malmesbury the carnival was in those pre-war years. In another local newspaper report, we are told that Malmesbury is a town of gaiety this week, where King Carnival reigns and the streets are thronged with happy, laughing people. The monuments and public buildings are hung with electric lights, and festoons and flags deck the streets. No one talks of war scares, because such matters are completely out of place. Malmesbury Carnival, famed for miles around for its gaiety and lavishness, was held in aid of the Malmesbury Hospital and the Royal Agricultural Benevolent Institution. On the 19th of August, with the ceremonial key still firmly clutched in her hand, Gwen arrived at Burton Hill Fields for the tug-of-war and other contests which formed the central part of the Saturday activity at Carnival. It's reported that she received a wonderful reception, and all along the route from the secondary school where the parade assembled to Burton Hill Field she was kept busy in acknowledging the loyal greetings of the crowd. The ladies of the court, too, were much admired, and the onlookers showed their appreciation of the presence of visiting royalty. Queens Kathleen Bishop of Shurston, Eunice Phillips from Stroud, and Olive Brown from Swindon were all in attendance. Malmesbury presented the prizes after being welcomed by the mayor. She had a handshake, a smile, and a pleasant word for everyone, and even the devil was bashful when Her Majesty bent to kiss his cheek. In the presence of the Duke and Duchess of Suffolk and Dr. Hodge, Gwen Hitchings presented prizes to the competitors who had taken part in the carnival procession. Ingenuity and novelty were the key words of the day. Contestants included the Daisy Bell twins on a miniature tandem, Rover the dog, an entry entitled The Sport of Kings, characterised by a Master T. Beak, and many others. This is Jean Wookey receiving her prize for her sports girl entry, complete with a dartboard pinned to her back. Jean rode her horse, complete with as many sporting accoutrements as possible, through the town, and was rightly acclaimed winner of the Under-16s Mounted Characters Award. Other competitors included two tiny tots, who trudged a mile bearing a stretcher without once disturbing the patient. Mr. E. F. Potter's National Farmers Union entry was in effect a farm on wheels, complete with livestock, dairy hands, etc. Mrs. A. L. Green of 5 Burneyvale was the winner of the Impersonation of a Film Star Award for her characterisation of Mother Riley Goes to France. Mrs. Green, who was over 70 years old at the time, was congratulated not only for her costume, but also for her resolution in having walked right the way through town in such heavy garb on such a hot day. One of the most popular participants in pre-war Malmesbury Carnival processions was the man referred to as Daddy Longlegs, who apparently maintained his equilibrium throughout and probably had as good view as anyone from atop his 12-feet-high stilts. After judging the Bonnie Babies Award, in which 44 youngsters entered, the tug-of-war competition began. Entries were received from the 3rd Royal Tank Regiment from Warminster, Bristol's C Division Athletics Club, Somerset County Police, Bristol's D Division Athletics Club, the Royal Engineers from Corsham, Monmouth County Police, RAF Halovington, and the Taunton Police Force. As can be seen from the presentation ceremony, the participants not only received the applause of the crowd, but also a smacker from the Carnival Queen. Reports of the time tell us that it was a well-balanced competition, keen in its competitiveness, and that a deciding pull was necessary on several occasions, but that the D.I. Hatchwell's Trophy was eventually won by the Monmouth County Police, who thus repeated their success of 1938. In the final they had a thrilling set to with the Tank Corps from Warminster, probably the best disciplined team on view, and it was only a marked advantage in weight that enabled the men of the law to get the verdict. Once all of the other sports activities had been completed on Burton Hill Field, the fun and merriment of Carnival returned to the streets and the Cross Hayes, where the Rogers International Fair did good business right through into the night. It was at this time that some 10 to 1200 weights of confetti was used in a mass confetti battle organised by Mr. Bernard Basavy. And so we come to Malmesbury Carnival's Queen of 1939, Gwen Hitchings, making her closing speech of thanks to the massed throng. To the people of Malmesbury and district, my dear friends, I feel I must take this opportunity of publicly expressing to each one of you my deep admiration of your kindness to me since I was elected as your Carnival Queen. The warm sincerity of the wonderful reception you gave me and the cheery smiles and handshakes have made the first 3 days of my queenship a never-to-be-forgotten occasion. And so I say, with a very full heart, thank you so much, and may happiness, peace and prosperity reign over all of us. Yours sincerely, and at your service, Gwen, Filands, Malmesbury. Happiness, peace and prosperity reign over all of us. So what else was happening in Malmesbury at the time of the 1939 Carnival? Before the start of the Carnival, the Town Council was adding to its efforts to attract businesses to the local cattle market by arranging a Christmas fat stock show. At the same meeting of the council, the Fire Brigade Committee disclosed that one light trailer pump with equipment was being sent to the town in connection with the local air raid precautions unit. Councillor Grabham reported that he had attended a meeting with the Chief Officer of the Swindon Brigade about the pooling of local fire brigade resources in the event of war. The council decided not to avail itself of the offer from the Home Office of sandbags at £10 per 1,000, since the Mayor, Dr. Hodge, said that they were not so necessary in a town such as Malmesbury, as they would be in places where there were large factories and public works. It was agreed, without comment, that the Mayor, together with Councillors Tanner, Grabham and Perrott, should constitute a committee with delegated powers to deal with the matters of evacuation. Elsewhere, a soldier and his wife were injured in a motorcycle collision near Hallavington. Leslie Cotterell's arm was broken. His wife sustained a broken leg and other injuries, and they were removed in the Malmesbury Borough ambulance. At the Somerset and District Horse and Horticultural Society, the number of entries was significantly reduced as a consequence of the heavy rain which threatened to spoil the show in the morning. Outstanding among the competitors in the horticultural section was Mr. A. E. Freemantle of Great Somerford, who amassed 35 prizes, including 10 firsts. Miss Vera Salter, the second daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Percy Salter of 54 Foundry Road, Malmesbury, was married on Saturday to Mr. Charles Benjamin James Butler, eldest son of Mr. and Mrs. Charles Butler of Shurston. The service at Westport Congregational Church, Malmesbury, was conducted by the Reverend W. Hovey from Shurston, and Mr. Arthur Butler, brother of the bridegroom, was best man. Here we see a full-page spread taken from the Western Daily Press and Bristol Mirror on Monday, August 7th, 1939, showing a bikini parade at Weston-super-Mare, the opening pair going out to bat for Gloucestershire against Somerset at the county ground in Bristol, the coronation of the Rington Carnival Queen, Miss Ivy Davis, the band of the 11th Battalion Royal Tank Regiment from Gloucester, and members of the Gloucestershire County cricket team relaxing after the day's play. you buy with your money back in August 1939? Well, if you were in need of a car, you could make your way down to Henley's, where a two-door fixed saloon Austin 8 would set you back the princely sum of £128, the four-seater option selling at £138. You could fuel your car with SO ethyl for lively acceleration and increased power. As the Scratchman curiously suggests, and the way she licks up hills on top. It being August, there were always special holiday bargains at Henley's of Victoria Street, Bristol. For instance, a 1939 Austin for just £34. Of course, if you really wanted to make an impression, there was a 1937 Studebaker 26 Dictator saloon available for £477. Given that the outbreak of the Second World War was but days away, it's astonishing to read newspaper articles such as these. St. John Simon, Chancellor of the Exchequer, told his audience of party members at a garden fete at Blenheim Palace in Oxford yesterday that a war postponed might be a war saved. We owe that peace to Mr. Chamberlain's efforts, and nothing that has happened since then should permit them to forget it. Some people went even further. Mr. Somerset de Share, the MP for South West Norfolk, said there would be no war for Britain in 1939. There will no doubt be a manufactured crisis, he said, because the Axis powers are always grinding their own axis, but that is not the same as war. Do not let Goebbels play upon your nerves as upon a stringed instrument, he urged his audience, saying that both the Prime Minister, Mr. Chamberlain, and Lord Halifax appeared to be in much better spirit lately, which was a good sign, as was the fact that all MPs had been sent away for their holiday in good heart. However, it's clear from some adverts that many believed that war was inevitable. Under the new Civil Defence Bill, employers or occupiers of factories in vulnerable areas were required to provide shelter if there were more than 30 employees on the site at any one time, and companies such as the Metal Agencies Company Limited of Queen's Square, Bristol, were on hand to provide basement strengthening in accordance with Home Office requirements. Of course, at the time of the 1939 Carnival, the fledgling football season had started with a First Division showing Blackpool at the top, unbeaten after 3 matches. Other teams in the First Division at that time, Arsenal, Liverpool, Everton, Stoke, Manchester United, Chelsea, Aston Villa and Sunderland, are all or were still in the top flight, while others such as Grimsby Town at the time of the presentation were no longer in the Football League. But what of Swindon, I hear you say? Well, they were in the 3rd Division South, and as can be seen from the table, occupied 20th position, having gleaned just 1 point from their opening 3 matches. In the world of entertainment, the fantasy adventure film The Wizard of Oz had just been released in 1939. It was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Original Song for Over the Rainbow. Initially, it was not a huge box office success, but subsequent re-releases soon made up for that. The Wizard of Oz was beaten in the Academy Awards Best Picture category by Gone with the Wind, starring Vivien Leigh, Leslie Howard, Olivia de Havilland and Clark Gable. It set new records for the total number of wins and nominations at an Academy Arcade ceremony, and was immensely popular at the box office, becoming the highest earning film made up to that point. Making adjustments for inflation, it is still allegedly the most successful film in box office history. A further popular release at the time of Malmesbury's Carnival was Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, an American political drama starring Jean Arthur and James Stewart. But the radio waves were dominated by the sweet voice of Judy Garland. Born Ethel Frances Gum, described by Fred Astaire as the greatest entertainer who ever lived. It was her singing of Somewhere Over the Rainbow that dominated radio playlists throughout the latter half of 1939.
Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, there's a land that I heard of once in a lullaby.
Although record charts weren't officially recognised until the 1950s, Glenn Miller's hit Moonlight is often referred to as being the most successful hit of the year.
Will this be moonlight? Nothing but moonlight. Will you be gone when the dawn comes stealing through? Are these just moon dreams, grand while the moon beams? But when the moon fades away, will my dreams come true?
On the sporting front, the last ever motor race was held at the Brooklands Circuit in August 1939. Brooklands, which opened in 1907, was the world's first purpose-built motorsport venue. It was over 30 metres wide and with banking nearly 9 metres high in places. Along the centre of the line ran a dotted black line known as the 50-foot line. By driving over and along the line, the driver could theoretically take the banked corners without having to use the steering wheel. In 1939, Cordy Milne of the USA was leading what was to become the first World Speedway Championship, while Lionel Van Praagh, the Australian captain of the 1939 Wembley Lions Speedway team, won the last race at Wembley before the outbreak of war in front of a crowd of over 60,000 fans. But inevitably it was politics that dominated the news in the summer of 1939, and here are the major players. Neville Chamberlain was the British Conservative Prime Minister from May 1937 to May 1940. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was the 32nd President of the United States and remains the only American president to be elected for more than 2 terms. Albert Lebrun was the President of France in 1939. Victor Emmanuel III was a member of the House of Savoy and the King of Italy between 1919 and 1946. Benito Mussolini was the leader of the Italian National Fascist Party. Ignacy Mościcki was elected President of Poland by the National Assembly in 1926 and remained influential as President until the end of September 1939, when he was imprisoned in Romania. In the Soviet Union, Mikhail Kalinin was the nominal head of the state of Russia, while Stalin was the de facto leader of the Soviet Union. Molotov was the principal Soviet signatory of the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact of 1939, signed during Malmesbury's Carnival week, which later became known as the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Ribbentrop was the foreign minister of Nazi Germany from 1938 to 1945. He played a key role in brokering the Pact of Steel with fascist Italy and the Soviet-German Non-Aggression Pact known as the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. And finally, Adolf Hitler. And what was happening in Europe during Malmesbury's Carnival week? Several Type 9 U-boats were built and more were ordered. In the summer of 1939, over 20 were commissioned. The U-125 was actually launched on the day of Malmesbury Carnival and was the scourge of the Atlantic until it was sunk on the 6th of May 1943 east of Newfoundland by HMS Orbis and HMS Snowflake. The Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact consisted of 2 parts. the Economic Agreement, and the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact. The Non-Aggression Pact stated that the two countries would not attack each other. If there was ever a problem between the two countries, it was to be handled amicably. The pact was supposed to last for 10 years. In fact, it lasted less than 2. In addition to these two agreements, Ribbentrop and Molotov added a secret protocol onto the Act, an addendum whose existence was denied by the Soviets until 1989. This agreement between the Nazis and the Soviets greatly affected Eastern Europe. In exchange for the Soviets agreeing not to join the possible future war, Germany gave the Soviets the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania. Poland was also to be divided between the two, and these new territories would give the Soviet Union the buffer that it wanted to remain safe from an invasion from the West. On the night of the 31st of August 1939, just days after the end of Malmesbury's Carnival celebrations, a small group of German operatives, dressed in Polish uniform and led by Alfred Najuks, seized the Gleiwitz radio station on the German-Polish border and broadcast a short anti-German message in Polish. The Germans' goal was to make the attack on the broadcast station look like the work of anti-German Polish saboteurs. To make the attack more convincing, the Germans brought in Franciszek Honiok, a German Silesian known for sympathising with the Poles, who'd been arrested the previous day by the Gestapo. He was dressed to look like a saboteur and then left, murdered at the scene, so that he appeared to have been killed while attacking the station. His corpse was subsequently presented as proof of the attack to the police and press, and World War II had started. And the rest, of course, is history. But since this started with the carnival theme, let this presentation return to Malmesbury and consider the impact that the war would have upon one of those who was instrumental in the success of many pre-war carnivals, and especially the one held in August 1939. Bernard Basavy was the second son of Edgar and Eleanor Basavy. Edgar moved to Malmesbury with his family in 1911, and from then on until the 1930s he lived at 32 Gloucester Street. In 1914 he married Eleanor Riddick, a local Malmesbury girl, and together they had 4 sons, the second being Bernard, in 1920. It was intended that Bernard should take over the family business, and after passing the Oxford University School Certificate at the secondary school in 1935, he went to Bristol School of Art. He had a great interest in magic and conjuring, and was a member of the Bristol Magic Circle. Using these skills, he advertised himself as a children's entertainer, and used those skills to further his ambition of raising money so that Malmesbury should have its own swimming pool. His acts were a highlight of the carnival, the great Athelstanio, who had his arms and hands chained and padlocked, and was then put in a tight sack and thrown into the river at the town bridge, only to miraculously emerge a few minutes later. He actually achieved this by scattering sawdust over the water's surface just before he dived in, then using the camouflage of the sawdust, swimming under the bridge and releasing himself, then waiting a suitably long time to raise the tension before reappearing. In September 1940, Bernard joined the Royal Air Force Volunteer Reserve, where he was selected for training as an observer. In late 1941, he was posted to 83 Squadron, based at Scampton in Lincolnshire, which flew Handley Page Hampden bombers. On the 7th of November, Bernard Basavy undertook his first operational sortie on a mission to bomb Cologne. On the 7th of December, Basavy's squadron was briefed for a raid on Aachen. He was accompanied on this flight by Pilot Officer Parsons, Pilot Officer Jacobs, and wireless operator and gunner Sergeant Wiscombe. In his book From Scampton to Sagan, James Castle wrote, After a relatively uneventful flight out, they found what they thought was the target, bombed it, and set course for home. When they were near to the coast, they were surprised to be met by a lot of anti-aircraft fire and searchlights. The aircraft was hit in the port engine, starting a fire. Parsons tried hard to keep the plane going homewards, but all that could be done was to ditch in the sea, which was successfully accomplished despite the large waves. The story of the ordeal in the open dinghy is now taken up by George Wiscombe. We struck water at 5:50 hours in the half-light, and believe me, the North Sea did not look inviting at this hour. By this time we were installed in the dinghy and the aircraft wings were under water, and we experienced the weird sensation of leaving a doomed aircraft with the undercarriage warning horn still sounding, and the lights in the cabin still burning. She sank as we drifted away, lost beneath the waves. We were all violently ill during the next few minutes, due, I think, to shock after the experience we'd gone through. Bernard Basavy was particularly ill. There was a heavy swell running and we were soaked in seawater, the waves breaking over the sides. Basavy would eat nothing and only craved for water. On Tuesday, December the 9th, he was considerably worse and complaining of thirst all the time. Wednesday, December the 10th, proved to be a bad day with high seas running. Some of the waves must have been 15 to 20 feet towering above us. It was remarkable how our boat stood up to the terrific battering it received. Basavy and now Jacobs were both failing badly, the former not eating the meagre rations he had, but craving for water. Towards night, Basavy became delirious, and we had great difficulty in keeping him in the boat. We feared that he might kick through the flimsy canvas. Soon after midnight, he calmed down, but was evidently in a bad way. When daybreak came, we could see that he was dead. We tried his heart and pulse, but he was gone and stone cold dead. I removed his wallet and forage cap, about all I could reach, and with a great effort we got him over the side. In the following week, the Wiltshire Gazette reported that Mr. and Mrs. Basavy of the High Street, Malmesbury, had been officially notified that their second son, aged 21, was missing. On the 15th of January 1942, the same paper reported that Mr. and Mrs. Basavy were much relieved to hear over the wireless that their son of Bomber Command, reported missing on an engagement 6 weeks previously, was now a prisoner of war in Germany. Sadly, this incorrect information had been provided by the infamous Lord Haw-Haw. An official confirmation of Bernard Basavy's death was published in the Wilts and Gloucestershire Standard on the 1st of August 1942. But the story does not end there. In 1946, a memorial to him in the National Children's Home was unveiled. Also, his cherished dream of a public swimming pool was realised, but it took until 1961 for the open-air pool to be completed in the old Alexandra Road. The old swimming pool site was owned by North Wiltshire District Council, who sold it to Wesley Housing Association to build new houses on the site upon the completion of the new activity zone. In 2008, the road serving this development was named Basavy Close. At the naming ceremony was the man whose marvellous archive and tremendous service to the carnival in Malmesbury made this presentation possible, Jim Gilmore. It was indeed a remarkable year, a remarkable carnival, and featured some remarkable people. We'd like to extend a special thank you to Charles Vernon, who supplied us with the information about Bernard Basavy, and whose drive and enthusiasm made the cinema equipment that we're using tonight possible. To Jim Gilmore's family for allowing access to his materials, and to Andy Solomon and Gordon Williams, honorary bustards, who have once again stepped into the breach to help us. Thank you very much.